E aí pessoal, tudo bem? Voltando aqui para a nossa cobertura do maior evento de gestão de frotas do mundo, da NAFA I&E. A gente está com transmissão exclusiva de alguns conteúdos aqui traduzidos pelo PARAR. É um prazer ter vocês aqui de volta. E um pouquinho antes da gente chamar a nossa próxima palestra, deixa eu dar uma revisada aqui no que vocês vão ver. A gente vai falar sobre reflexões de mobilidade. São dois especialistas do setor debatendo, por exemplo, situação de carro elétrico, carro autônomo. A gente vai falar como que fica cobrança, entrega autônoma, drone. Tem muita coisa legal acontecendo. Vocês vão ver que lá fora o cenário está um pouco mais avançado do que aqui, principalmente com relação a essa questão de estações de recarga e carros elétricos. Isso já é uma realidade em boa parte dos Estados Unidos e da Europa. É um cenário que deve chegar aqui em breve também. E para falar um pouco dessa perna aí da discussão, quando que tudo isso chega ao Brasil, a gente vai trazer o Sérgio Jaba, ali da Golsat, e o Carlos Castilho, da Geotab, e para a gente trazer um pouquinho dessa conversa e ver o que é factível aqui no mundo das nossas frotas, e o que ainda vai ficar no horizonte por alguns anos, mas que a gente precisa ficar de olho. As duas pessoas que vão apresentar essa palestra, gente, é o Lucas Neckermann. O Neckermann é um consultor de mobilidade, trabalha ao redor do mundo, aí tem uma série de projetos na Europa e nos Estados Unidos, está baseado principalmente na Inglaterra, e o James Carter, da Vision Mobility. Vamos lá?
Welcome everyone to NAFA's virtual I&E and our session titled Musing on Mobility. So I'm Mike Kemnetter, CAFM. I am the Fleet Services Manager for General Mills, also serving as NAFA's Vice President, and I'll be your moderator for this session and also for the Q&A session. So before I introduce your presenters, let's review a few housekeeping notes. If you have any technical or audio issues during the presentation, just click the help icon in the navigation bar, and this will connect you to a platform representative. Just to let you know, this session was pre-recorded. However, we will have a live discussion immediately following the presentation, so make sure you stay online for that. We want to make this session, the live discussion after, as interactive as possible, so please use the chat box to submit questions, share resources, and make comments. I'll ensure your questions are answered during the Q&A time. So this session recording and Q&A will be recorded and archived later today in the on-demand section of this platform, and that recording, along with others from the conference, will be accessible until Friday, October 2nd. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. We have Lucas Neckermann, who's the Managing Director at Neckermann Strategic Advisors, and we have James Carter, who's the Principal Consultant at Vision Mobility. I'll be back at the end to wrap it up, but for now, let's kick off our session with Lucas and James. Take it away, guys.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mike. So it's a real pleasure to be here in this virtual setting and to muse and speculate and just rant on all things mobility. Now, James and I, we've known each other for quite a few years, and very often we're of the same opinion. Every once in a while, we're of a very different opinion, and I think the combination of those things is going to make for a really fun session. I think we're going to cover a lot of ground. We've got the connected, the autonomous, and the shared, and the electric. We've got the micro-mobility. We've got vehicle charging. We have got wireless charging. We've got maybe even dip into a little bit about how cities are going to change. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you for joining us.
It's good to see you, Lucas. And you know what? It's going to be a good little chat we're going to have here. You know, as you said, we're always a bit opinionated, so I want to get it out there. I want to let people know what we're thinking and what's going on. It's going to be fun.
Perfect. All right, let's start with electrification. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on right now with special IPOs, special purpose vehicles for investments, Nikola going down that route, Fisker going down that route, Lordson going down that route. Is everyone just trying to get a little bit of Tesla magic, with Tesla now not just being not just the most valuable OEM? It was that a long time ago. I think it's something like 30% of the value of the entire Dow Jones automotive space. It's mad.
it's wild. It really is. And we're talking about an OEM that's producing 500,000 cars a year. We look at Volkswagen or Toyota. They're around the 10 million mark a year. So these guys are literally producing 20 times the volume that Tesla has. And I think what's more interesting, they've got decades of delivering stable profits and stable dividends. So I think that there should be a question about why is Tesla's stock so high, but yet I think there is some good reasons why, and one is when you spend some time in that car after a previous car, you do feel like this car represents some sort of future with its technology and standard equipment, like its semi-autonomous driving, its ability to user experience when using it as an electric vehicle. It really does. Like my wife says, our car, it feels like a spaceship. Well, every other car feels like a car. So that's I think one of the reasons that people think so much about what the future is happening. And look, let's face it, Musk is always in the news. He's always promoting something, and frankly, he does a damn good job at it. But
on Twitter kind of reminds me of somebody else, doesn't it?
Exactly, for real. but the thing that with Tesla is they've kind of got this decade of history that's proven that they can execute on what they're planning to do. So, I think, the Tesla bulls are always going to say, hey, there is some justification to it. But, going back to some of the other guys that are doing these, new IPOs, I'm not quite sure about that, Lucas. What do you think of some of these guys? I mean, I'll give you my opinion, but what do you think?
Well, I think, frankly, the big question and the big test is what's behind it. Is there anything behind it? I mean, are we talking about PowerPoint and a nice design? And frankly, that's what some of them are. Or is it someone who actually has IP, someone who has some production capacity, someone who actually has a product that people are ordering and wanting and needing right now? So I think a couple of good examples. I think Rivian is a fantastic example. Obviously, 100,000 orders from Amazon and other companies lining up to buy the delivery vans. But the likes of Fisker, I'm sorry, with all due respect, he's already driven one company, or was it two, against the wall, and he's lining up to do another one. But who knows? Maybe there's some magic in there that we're missing.
Totally. I think one thing that we should do is step away and have a look at the total industry as a whole. And what we see in the industry as a whole is this big direction moving towards, electrification for a whole bunch of reasons. And a lot of these reasons we'll touch on in a minute, when we come to talk more about fleets in electrification. But, cost drivers, we're talking about efficiencies, we're talking about, clean air, lowering CO2, all of these big picture things, I think really represent, a huge opportunity for electric vehicles as a whole. And I think we should understand how these OEMs are moving forward within that context first. But I really think you're absolutely right. When you're looking at these new guys that are coming up and through, and right now, I believe, right now, is if you're going to enter the industry as an OEM, it's now in a time of direct disruption that you want to be doing it. But Fisker, for instance, that we just found out they don't even have a platform. These other guys like Hyliion, Nikola is throwing out $5,000 orders for a new sketch, saying that they haven't signed a platform up either. So we don't. Some of these guys, they just don't have the tech, and they haven't done the hard yards in the tech.
What was it, about 100 years ago, there were some 400 car brands in the US. Everybody was trying to get on the bandwagon. Ford was doing, and of those 400 brands, about 10, 15, 20 years later, maybe 20 survived. Right. And it feels very much the same thing, right? That you've got a whole bunch of money being thrown at, in fairness, some decent leaders, and some good ideas, and some market niches that need to be covered. But it's going to take a lot more than that. And again, I want to hone in on this point. IP, having specific talents in the business, vertically integrating.
Absolutely.
Actually, a good example is Lucid, who have not just a beautiful car, perhaps not the perfect fleet car, but a beautiful car. But they actually are looking to, have the drivetrain, to have the the battery management system, and all of these things in-house, and have some of that knowledge, and that actually gives them some genuine value. And I think that's probably also, if I'm a fleet manager looking at, what could I potentially order? What do I need? Well, vans, obviously, trucks are going to be interesting 2, 3, 4 years from now. But in terms of the cars, that's why you keep hearing the same thing. I'm going to order the cars when they come from a manufacturer that I know is going to be around 3 or 5 years from now.
Right. Yeah, and totally. I absolutely totally agree with you, and I think that's one of the things that really separate out people like Rivian and especially Lucid, that said, look, we're designing it, most of it in-house. We're building up that IP that's really critical for the value. If you're talking about it from an investment point of view, it's really critical to have that value, because that's what drives the company's future profits and future development. Now you can make an argument that some parts may not need to be vertically integrated, such as, I don't know, things that are very common and, have been commoditized. And, I hear that Tesla does that still, but, there's also still value in making sure that those hardware has your IP written all over it as well.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Considering we're not going to be shifting gears too much longer in electric vehicles. Why should the fleet manager care? Are we seeing an acceleration, or what's the status?
Yeah, good question. And I think one of the first things, I want to explain my T-shirt. Now that sounds a bit strange, but this is why I've worn my Mustang T-shirt today. And I've written on here, RIP ICE. Now, this is not just for the enthusiasts, because, hey, I like cars, and I know that I'm going to be iced out at my next Tesla supercharger, or I'm going to be cold rolled by some guy for wearing such a T-shirt like this. But I want to explain why I've written this for the fleet manager. And really, there's a couple really important things that we should really think about. One is, how much does this cost to run? What is the operating cost? And we're seeing 50, 60, 70% decrease in the cost of IC vehicle, electric vehicles versus IC to run. So what's that?
Operating costs much lower. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, way lower. And it's that energy plus it's that maintenance thing, and those two things combined, dramatically lower. And as soon as you hear those 50% drop type numbers, you just can't achieve this with IC. And the bigger you get the vehicles, it's almost the bigger the numbers that are involved in reducing these costs. Particularly, you talk about, like, so I know some of the guys watching here will be operating class 4, 5, 6, even 7 and 8 trucks, really big things. And once you start electrifying those things, the drop in that cost to run is huge. And that's why it's RIP ICE. So
I think we agree on that, and I think many fleet managers will probably agree on that. It's just a question of the timing, right? And the flood of vehicles hitting the market, and what are the residual values? But I think we're beginning to see some of those statistics now, where the Teslas have residual values that are through the roof. After 3 years, you've got the BMWs, the Mercedes, etc. 45%, 50% down, which is typical. We know that. That's usually baked into the leasing, right? But what was it on Tesla after 3 years? What's a Model S after 3 years?
So some guys came up with 90% of residual value on a Model 3 for 3 years. I don't believe that, but that's one number that's out there. But if you can achieve, say, a 60 or 70% number after 3 years, I still think you'd be absolutely laughing. There's these guys in somewhere, I believe it was the Bargersville police force. I could be in Illinois or Iowa, I can't remember where, but these guys were having such big reductions that if they put a fleet of Model 3s on versus the Dodge Charger fleet pursuit vehicle they put a fleet on of these things, they could actually pay for putting a new deputy on. And that, to me, blows my mind.
On the other hand, you had that fleet of BMW i3s. I think it was the LA Police Department that had them parked all the time. They were returning them after 3 years. They had a couple hundred miles on the odometer. What went wrong there? Do you know?
I honestly, I don't know. But, I wonder why. Is that the right car for that? Maybe they needed to do more miles, on a daily basis. We know that an i3 really doesn't have a lot of range, and maybe it just doesn't have quite the performance that they need. And I'm not quite sure what the use case is, but certainly with Burgersville, they certainly had all those things that they need for a pursuit vehicle ticked off. It had the performance, it had the handling, it had the and it had enough range to last them through the day to charge it up. But yeah, the i3 one, that's a good question.
Yeah. On the other hand, I know that the New York Police Department, NYPD, also has. Well, they were very, very early in with the Chevys, and I believe they were reasonably happy with those. There's so many different reasons. Let me throw another one out there. Most fleet managers probably won't care about this, but their bosses certainly will. The CFOs certainly will, and that's investors into the company that they work for.
Right.
So what we're getting to see is, asset management and insurance company investment, major investment companies, BlackRock, whatever, looking at ESG investments. In other words, and investing also in zero carbon companies, which means that all of a sudden there's pressure down to the fleet manager to say, hey, how do we turn our own company into a net zero company? Because it's important for our stock price, which frankly, most fleet managers probably haven't thought too much about. But the whole issue of divestment is gaining steam. You've got some university endowments now pairing their investments in fossil fuel companies and things like that. So you don't want to be caught in the wrong kind of storm here.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's not just, I'm hearing it from company fleet managers as well. This sort of thing, that they need to literally report almost a quarterly CO2 emission output. How many miles has the fleet done? What are the cars and trucks that they're running, so that they can, push that back up to their CFO or whoever, so that they can, report on these numbers and be able to demonstrate quarterly or annual decreases in CO2 emissions, because it's really starting to matter to key investors now. And we're also seeing the same thing with government and government associated entities as well, where they're saying, look, we need to reduce this CO2. And I think the really key thing about reducing the CO2 emissions is that it's really closely linked to, getting the vehicles off gasoline or getting them off diesel, because we know that they're higher CO2 output.
Yeah, let's stop burning dinosaur bones.
I mean, for real.
And there's other stuff. I mean, obviously there was the whole Dieselgate thing. Daimler just got a fine for their own
absolutely
of this. The oil companies are under a lot of pressure. BP just scrapped its dividend. Others are looking at how they're going to be moving ahead. Not easy times to be in the fossil fuel business. On the other hand, if you're in the broader energy business and you're making electricity, maybe it's a really good time to be, as long as you can put that energy through the pipe and into the car, which brings us to charging. Let's talk about charging, James. Where do we start? Do we have enough chargers? What kind of chargers do we need? Do we all plug the cars into our homes? Do we need to roll out the highway charging? What about heavy duty charge? There's so much to unwrap.
You're right. This is like we could talk on this, but let's have a 10-part series just on charging, Lucas. So I think we could fill it up.
Yes. Dial in here.
Dial in here. Exactly. So let me give you a bit of an overview of some key points that I'm seeing and I think we need to think about. First thing that we should know is where and how do people charge? And the first thing is most people charge, or at a workplace as well. Most people charge at home or at the workplace, and you can get away with level 1, like just plugging it into any old socket, or level 2 charging, because even a level 1, you plug it in overnight and you've got 100 and some kilometers of range in most cars. So that's enough to get you there and back from work. So let's not discount pretty basic level 1 charging, but level 2 charging, certainly is obviously much better for homes, and it's much better for workplaces and shops and things like that. You can get, somewhere between 50 and 80 kilometers of charge per hour, or what's that in miles? I don't know, 30 to 50 miles of charge.
Let me just interrupt. Who's paying for that? Who's paying for it at home? Who's paying for it at the office?
Well, that's the question. And one thing I think we should note is that the extra electricity that's actually used for a workplace or a shopping center is really not that much. I mean, if you get your charge done on off-peak, you might even be paying $3, $4, $5 at the most to charge that thing up. And really that it's not expensive. And for a shopping center to promote, themselves by offering an electric vehicle charging, by investing a little bit of money in that customer, that's worthwhile. But even operators, say like ChargePoint or whoever, they recognize that this is, people are willing to pay. So, they can offer it that way too. So I think that's important. I think the other use case we need to think about is, when we're doing trips. So and another point, which I want to get to in a minute, is people who live in apartments or, they can't charge up at home. But if you're doing a trip, you want to have fast charging, because you want to be able to, stop, have a quick rest break and know that your car's charged up and off on the road. And we're seeing that with Tesla superchargers. We're seeing that, with the rollout of the fast charge DCFC equipment across the US and Europe. So, those things are happening. But the one thing I think that's important is for non-Tesla, they really need to improve on their ability to use it, because it's not necessarily user friendly, and it's not cohesive in the way you rock up to Tesla and plug it in.
Right, we had the CHAdeMO versus
right.
BPS standard that took a while to resolve. I think it's all resolved now, and we know where we're going, and everyone except Tesla, even though in Europe anyway, Tesla is on CCS as well. So
yeah.
So we know where we're headed. It's not like we have different plugs anymore, but the super fast, I mean, and with that I'm talking upwards of 350 kilowatt hour charging. That's wildly exciting, and I think frankly it's wildly exciting for passenger cars, but it's even more exciting and frankly also more important when we talk about trucks.
Right, and that's standard. The CCS Type 2 and CCS Type 1 for North America, i.e. J1772, that's not going to be the standard that we're going to commonly see on trucks. We're seeing the Charing Group, which is the CCS group attached for industry-wide rollout of trucks. They're going to be going down the track of launching their own very, very high output standard. Now, they've said, that this is going to be, more than 2 megawatts. So, i.e. 20 times, 10 to 20 times the pace of a supercharger. So this is serious output. And the other thing that's really important about this is that almost every OEM, heavy duty OEM, is on this. There's all the support from the EVSE suppliers. So this standard will be rolled out soon, and it's going to be transformational for trucking.
Okay, so in trucking, we've had this discussion. I know that you and I have had this discussion on LinkedIn, and there's plenty of very, very vocal people still very supportive of hydrogen, and I think we probably agree that hydrogen has a a specific use case, maybe for the really long distance stuff, but even that window is closing when you're talking about, you know, that charging speed. But hey, but on the other hand, you know, then we've got the charging speed, but the weight of the batteries, doesn't that draw away from the usability of the rig?
So I think one thing we should remember is understanding how, and I know a lot of the fleet managers on here, some will be involved in heavy duty trucks and some may not. However, I think in this use case, it's really important to understand how this fast charging, how these big batteries allow trucks to fit within, you know, driver duty cycles. And once you've hit the 500-mile range that, you know, Tesla's saying that they will with their truck launch next year, you know, you can drive for that maximum 8-hour period and not have to charge. You don't have to stop. And at 8 hours, you got to stop anyway. So you might as well charge. And if you can charge, at least get to 80% after half an hour, which is your duty cycle break before you can keep going, you're in. Like, once you're able to do that, there's no use for hydrogen.
Yeah, I was going to ask, any use case left for hydrogen?
Well, I think if you're doing these, perhaps it's some ultra long, non-stop team driver type approach where you got 2 or 3 in the cab and off they go to some place in the middle of Yukon or Alaska or somewhere, and they need that crazy amount of range, that then maybe there's a use case in that. But, you know, this is,
or if you take the driver out.
Narrow. What's that?
Or take the driver out, right? So maybe there's a use case with hydrogen on the autonomous trucking side.
That is true, but those autonomous trucks still have to go to base, and they still have to be unloaded, and they still have to have some sort of sitting point whether they go out in the next time. So, you know, that point where they're sitting and doing their base charging still resonates in an autonomous landscape as well. I don't see it not fitting together.
All right, as long as we're on charging, one more topic, and that's wireless. You know, I've been a huge fan of wireless for a long time, inductive charging. For anyone who's not familiar, it's the idea of, you know, basically the same as your electric toothbrush, that there's no contact point, and that depending on how far you are away from the pad, you can have either stationary inductive charging or even dynamic inductive charging, which would be basically laying down, you know, conductive cement or tarmac, so that you can charge a vehicle while driving. How do you feel, James?
Well, my opinion is I'm less keen on it, and there's a few technical reasons why I don't think it's going anywhere, and there's one really important economic or industry reason why I think it's probably not going to go too far. The first one is efficiency. One, you know, we're not seeing quite the same efficiencies as the best, you know, conductive charging systems out there. You know, the best conductive charging systems are getting 97% or above. The really good ones are 99%. With the best case that we're seeing out of wireless is around 90%. In a dynamic environment, you know, that drops. And we sort of need to understand, well, what does this efficiency represent? Well, you know, if we put 100 gallons of gas in, let's just say a truck, if we get 90% efficiency, you know, 10 of those gallons are, you know, dribbled out down the side. So I think that's one point. The second point is alignment. And we see this with some of the truck and bus operators, is that you must have very exact, to get the pads exactly over top of each other, you must be, you know, that far apart either side, and in practice that's not easy to achieve. I know the BMW had some like arrows you go back and forth, but you know, I think that's one of the problems. And the third is having a dynamic environment. If you lay it down in a road, you know, how do you, while you're driving at, you know, 60 miles an hour, how do you keep your car on track so that those pads are perfectly in alignment? Very difficult in a driven world, potentially a little bit possible in an autonomous world. So they're the key reasons. Oh, the last one is, what are OEMs doing? And I think this is the key question. And when we look at light duty vehicles, we don't really see anyone supporting it. We know that BMW had a short trial with, I don't know, 50 or 100 cars or something, but there's no one that's supporting it. It adds weight. It adds a whole bunch of, you know, other issues. So And I think that's the key reason that we won't see it move forward, in my opinion. What's yours,
James? I'm a little bit more bullish on this. I do see specific use cases. I see specific use cases in off-highway applications. I see it at airports, at warehouses, at parking lots, campuses, that sort of thing, that could where it could actually reduce the weight of the batteries in the vehicle. Forklifts, for example, I believe are already in some cases using inductive charging, things like that. So I do see specific use cases. Also buses. I know that in a couple of cities, in particular in Europe, you've got buses where you have wireless pads either on the bottom, or you have the buses connecting to a charging facility at the bus stop, and really getting a 5-minute jolt of energy between driver changes or whatever else. So I always like to think of specific use cases, and it's a little bit like autonomous, which we should probably get to next. It's about specific use cases.
I think it's the same with hydrogen. There's going to be some specific use cases. From my point of view, and if I ask, well, how widely spread are those use cases going to be across the network? Then I know you're more bullish. I'm less bullish about the prospect of wireless charging, but we'll see. I know there's some guys who are doing a good job, but in my particular opinion.
All right. Fair enough.
We do disagree on something, Lucas. There you go.
COVID. We haven't actually talked about that. Who's it going to help? Who's it going to hurt? Let's talk about. I know there's a favorite topic of yours: dealerships. How are they going to fare out of this?
Oh, yeah, that's a. I really think dealerships are going to go through a whole new. They've got a whole bunch of challenges that they got to get through with COVID. We're talking to customers with, figuring out how to do servicing, and it's the same thing with a lot of fleet buyers who take their cars to dealerships to get serviced. It's got to be figured out. I think perhaps we should really look at dealerships in the context of a bit broader perspective than just COVID, because, I think you and I both agree, COVID has really been an accelerator of trends that we've already been seeing.
And certainly in the mobility space.
Totally. Yeah, totally. But I think what are those trends that COVID has accelerated? And, I think one of them is online type purchases. That's been happening for a while, where we've been looking at things online, but, doing actual purchases, doing the actual ordering, I think that's one of the things. And, smoothing out some of the purchase process, to buy a car is still kind of whack.
Some big companies have grown out of this. There's one in Europe, Kazoo, that boom, they had a fundraise during COVID, did extremely well, valuation now in the billions.
Wow.
Because they were able to deliver used vehicles to people at their homes.
Exactly.
Anyone who during COVID is thinking, well, maybe I'm a little bit cautious about public transport, I'm a little bit cautious about this, that, or the other, maybe I need to trade in my vehicle, or maybe my lease is up and I don't want to go back. Boom, they would deliver it straight to your door. And what a brilliant use case.
Totally.
And again, COVID accelerating that particular type of service.
Actually, one thing, just on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think the point is still the same. Is, I was talking to the VC that had a strong investment in Commune Auto, who's the biggest car sharing company in Canada here, and they said to me, what, Commune Auto is doing really, really well during COVID, and I said to them, how can any sharing service possibly be doing well in COVID? And they said, look, this is why. People are saying, I don't want to get on public transport. I still want to get around. I want to have that car to get where I need to go for a short period of time during the city. They get in it. They don't have to be around anyone else. They get in it, do what they have to do, and come back. And I went, that's one of those things that we would have thought, nah, this is going to be a disaster. But it's actually flipped.
from what I can tell, I think it's so car sharing is one of those things that it takes from two sides, right? It takes users from two sides. On the one hand, it takes users away from car ownership. I mean, that's always the message to cities that car sharing gives. Hey, you know, you let car sharing in, and you're going to have less ownership, less parking on the streets, and all that, which is a great thing that car sharing provides. But the other thing that it has done, certainly in the context of COVID, is it's allowed for people to get around slightly, I don't want to say safer than public transport, because it's probably simply not true, but at least the perception of safety in car sharing is higher, and that's why I think car sharing is done in most cities reasonably well. The same can't be said of all parts of shared mobility, and boy, maybe we go through those. It is, oh man, I have incredible amounts of sympathy to all of the friends and colleagues in the public transport space, because this is a triple whammy. So they've got a lack of riders because, you know, obviously no one's wanting to use it, but more importantly, nobody's needing to use it, and even needing to use it in the long term.
Right.
Which means that they have a lack of money, and with a lack of money, they can't invest. And public transport needs to invest to stay competitive. It needs to change its lines. It needs to buy new buses. It needs to electrify. It needs to upgrade its services. It needs to have greater reliability. All of those things that public transport needs to do are now going to get shortchanged. New York City itself has, just New York City has a $12 billion hole in the budget at MTA. So public transport is going to get hit pretty hard. And even more, you've got some companies, and frankly, I find this fairly irresponsible. You've got companies forbidding their staff to use public transport. And I find it irresponsible because there's fairly low evidence suggest that public transport is actually a transmitter of the disease. They are spending a lot of money and effort in keeping things clean, and if people would use the masks and whatever else, it's reasonably safe, and at least as safe as people, you know, getting on an airplane. So a great deal of sympathy for public transport, because it's really a triple whammy. If we go into the other areas of shared mobility, you know, we've got ride hailing and ride pooling and micromobility. Ride hailing initially got hit pretty hard, didn't it? I mean, Uber and Lyft, you know, had a serious 70, 80, 90% drop in ridership. But what's really impressive, and this is really notable, is how good they were at not pivoting, but adding strings to their bow, right? Adding verticals. So Uber Eats, for the first time, now is bringing in more revenue into Uber than the Uber Rides platform is.
It's totally wild,
phenomenal.
isn't it?
And you know, you really got to give them a lot of credit for being that versatile as an organization. Of course, this is, you know, was in the pipeline and everything, but that versatile as an organization to put a lot of weight into the food delivery, and frankly also use the same supply, right? Because if you're a platform like Uber or Lyft, you don't just have to make the customers happy, you have to make the drivers happy. So you have to provide them rides, right? And having people, you know, having drivers deliver you know, a pizza as opposed to another passenger, hey, does it make that big of a difference? Well, it's a lot better than delivering nothing and having zero revenue. So hats off to them for that, you know, flexibility.
Yeah, look, I think that's one thing we've really seen in COVID, and I think we should really think about this in the fleet context too, is that, you know, we've seen almost this pivot happening in terms of people's private mobility being replaced by some sort of delivery system, you know, that's happening. And obviously, when you're thinking about delivery, it's a much more fleet bias type application here, and it really is an opportunity. Obviously, you know, Uber and Lyft, you know, they source privately, but, you know, once we're talking about big delivery systems, you know, we're talking about UPS, we're talking about, you know, all these other guys. You know, they must be doing really, really well right about now.
Yeah, I think logistics, at least if they're flexible enough to jump on that, then it would be a very good time.
Oh, absolutely. But you know what? I really think that some of these trends that we've created in COVID, like, you know, work from home, like ordering in almost everything in our lives, I think some of this is going to continue. It's not going to go away.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. You know, there's going to be questions around, and every fleet manager has to ask him or herself this question. Are people still going to the office? Are they going to the office 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week? Are they going to micro offices? Are there going to be is it going to be one central office, or are they going to be going to shared office spaces, co-working facilities? How many miles do you really need if the vehicle is only used 50% of the time? Do they actually still need a vehicle? What kind of vehicle do they need? These are questions that fleet managers have to be asking themselves right now, because you know, the fleet of tomorrow is not going to look like the fleet of today, and that goes into my favorite topic as well. It goes into autonomous as well, where, man, COVID has been such a crazy accelerator, right? So last year, James, you and I, we were in Louisville, and we were talking about autonomous, and we were talking about mobility as a service. We were talking about electrification, all of these fun things. And we said, hey, listen, if you're a very progressive fleet manager, you should be considering, you know, autonomous options.
Electrification, yeah.
A year from now, if we get together, I think any fleet manager who isn't looking at autonomous options is gonna have missed the boat. You know, that's how fast things are moving right now.
Exactly. And you know, it's not just, you know, autonomous, it's all those case technologies, connected, autonomous, shared, electric. And I think fleet managers really need to be keyed into all of them, because this COVID has really driven this thing a whole much further than we've really seen in the past. And, you know, they can't afford to sort of sit and think about it anymore. It's go station now.
Yeah. So you mentioned delivery. So we've seen dozens of college and corporate campuses that have had deliveries of goods with robots, delivery robots. We're seeing, wow. Yeah. We've seen Beep and Navia were shuttling blood samples. I think it was at Mayo Clinic that was doing tests, and they were shuttling it from one part of the campus to the other. What a perfect use case, by the way, to have autonomous, right? You don't want a driver or even an operator necessarily getting in touch with the blood samples if it's avoidable. Right. So you've seen, just in the last couple of weeks, Waymo's got a fleet of 13 Peterbilt 18-wheelers being delivered to Dallas that's going to be operating on the I-20, the I-10, and the I-45. Right. But they're not alone in Dallas. TU Simple's already set up shop earlier this year in Dallas. They're partnering with UPS and Penske, you were talking about earlier. You've got Kodiak testing delivery vans there. Meanwhile, you've got Michigan, which is awesome, by the way. I love this. They've got this autonomous corridor between Ann Arbor and Detroit, around, I don't know, whatever, 40 miles or something like that, where you've got BMW, Toyota, Honda, GM, Ford, Argo AI, a whole bunch of companies getting together to do this 40-mile stretch of highway and calling it an autonomous corridor. That's
wild. That's cool, isn't it?
This is really fun stuff. Sorry,
not to interrupt you guys. We got 5 more minutes left, so keep going.
Thanks, Mike, for the reminder. Hey, I will say though, Lucas, that you know, you might remember our pal Damien de Klerk in Berlin.
Sure. Street sweepers and yeah.
Yeah, so he's doing those autonomous street sweepers. And, you know, I think the way that these electric and technology applications are being rolled out, you know, being able to think beyond the box and be able to think about all the different applications that we see, you know, it's wild how much stuff this can affect. And it's also wild how the effect that it can have on a fleet manager as well.
I'll give you one more, which is really a favorite of mine, a company called Voyage. It's super interesting. Yes. They do senior citizen communities in Florida and California. And if senior citizens want one thing, and that's to get around safely and securely, and they are not just doing that with in COVID, they're actually putting in UV lighting into the vehicles that kills the virus.
Perfect.
So that citizens can continue to be transported from A to B. And again, if they can do it in those communities, they can certainly do it on a college campus. They can certainly do it on a corporate campus. They can do it in any kinds of things. So you know, fleet managers, tune in and look into the autonomous opportunities.
Yeah, it's that these broad challenges, these broad technologies that are coming in are really going to, you know, totally change our fleet management world, just as much as we own our private cars as well. It's the same deal, but you know, I think there's this whole new layer of fleet challenge that's going to be out there in the next little while.
I agree, because the working from home, hey, and let's face it, not everyone can, and we need to recognize that as well. No, but not everybody has that flexibility. You know, when you've got the Googles and the Facebooks in Silicon Valley basically saying, hey, you know, come back sometime middle of 2021. You know, we don't need you in the office. That's not something every company can do, obviously.
Right.
But on the other hand, a lot of companies are discovering that this working from home is really working pretty well, and could actually lead to enormous opportunities with staff not in one city, but in 20 cities, in 200 cities, completely distributed workforces. And boy, think about the challenges for a fleet manager when you've got your staff wildly distributed across the US.
But here's the question, is it really a challenge for them? If they can work from home and they can send their stuff out, maybe the challenge is not necessarily the person who spends a lot of time in the office, but perhaps the challenge is the person who, you know, has to go and make calls and, you know, do face-to-face, or even for them, do they need to do face-to-face, or, you know, are there other ways that they can figure it out? So I think just as every business and every government you know, industry is changing and trying to figure out these things, you know, fleet managers has to adapt with that as well and provide, because really they provide the needs for their company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big takeaway on this is probably that it's a lot more personalized attention that the fleet manager will give, because someone, you know, someone working from home in Dallas is going to have a very different situation from someone working in Des Moines, is going to have a different situation from someone in Duluth, right? So every individual is going to have a different mobility challenge that the mobility manager needs to address.
Well, that's right, and that's what we should call them. It's not longer fleet manager; it's mobility manager. I think that's a good point.
That's a great way to hand the reins back to Mike.
Great, thanks, guys. Hey, on behalf of NAFA, I just want to thank Luke and James for their time and expertise for joining us today. Normally, if we were together, we'd have a round of applause right now. But we'll be transitioning to our Q&A portion of our presentation. So please remember to enter your comments and questions into the chat box so we can be sure to address them. So if you want to participate in the Q&A session, don't close the presentation box on your screen. It's going to automatically switch over in just a few moments. So guys, thank you again today, and we'll see you in a few seconds on the Q&A session.
Thanks, Mike. See you in a bit.
Thank you as well. See you there.
Voltando aqui para o nosso cenário Brasil, né, para a nossa cobertura oficial aí da NAFA, o maior evento de gestão de frotas do mundo, cobertura exclusiva aqui do Parar. E para a gente reverberar um pouquinho esses assuntos tão bacanas que foram apresentados aí nessa última palestra, eu vou trazer dois convidados, gente. O Sérgio Jabari, diretor de tecnologia da Golsat, e o Carlos Castilho, vice-presidente associado da Geotab. Sejam muito bem-vindos, gente. Obrigado aí por cederem um pouquinho do tempo de vocês. O Sérgio está aqui pertinho da gente, o Carlos está no Canadá, né, Carlos? Sejam bem-vindos.
Bom dia. Boa tarde agora.
Boa tarde,
Pedro. Satisfação estarmos aqui juntos para podermos tecer comentários aí em relação à palestra que acabamos de ver aí, muito boa.
A gente viu uma série de tendências, essa pergunta vai para vocês dois, tá? Por exemplo, falamos de híbridos, de eletrificação, de estações de recarga, de compartilhamento, de veículos autônomos. E aí eu queria saber a opinião de vocês. Qual dessas tendências pega mais rápido aqui no Brasil e tende a impactar mais a frota, na opinião de vocês?
Tá. Vou pensar assim, eu imagino que, Pedro, compartilhamento, por exemplo, acho que é algo que já chegou.
Uhum.
O carro elétrico é algo que está chegando. E veículos autônomos acho que é algo que vem um pouco depois. Pensando em cada um, né? Compartilhamento, a gente tem assim, no B2C, né, para o público em geral, né, nós temos aquele compartilhamento dono para usuário, nós temos o carro como serviço, né, que as próprias montadoras podem oferecer, e temos carona. Carona é um tipo de compartilhamento que já está aí, já existe. Né, dentro do B2B, a gente tem o pool da frota corporativa, né, o ambiente corporativo é até mais fácil da gente ter isso, é uma realidade, carros compartilhados entre vários motoristas, e temos também a carona corporativa, né, existem alguns aplicativos aí, empresas que usam isso, então, nesse ponto, eu penso que é algo que já está aí acontecendo. Carro elétrico, que é algo que eu acho que vem um pouquinho pela frente, o gestor de frota tem que olhar, assim, alguns aspectos, né, entre eles, a operação, né, aquele tipo de veículo vai funcionar, você viu que eles deram aí o exemplo da polícia, né, uma polícia funcionou, na outra não funcionou, ainda na operação, né, pensando na infraestrutura e na questão do carregamento, vocês viram lá, né, o tipo de tomada, né, a capacidade da bateria, né, como que funciona o carregador, né, carregadores mais rápidos e mais devagares. Então, isso tudo vai ter uma diferença para o gestor de frota se ele vai selecionar. Então, é algo que vai vindo com o tempo. Né, mas o que fecha a conta aí, acho que é o TCO, né, o exemplo que a gente viu ali, 50% de economia com combustível e manutenção, é algo que ajuda a fechar a conta. Então, o gestor que consegue fazer ali um bom TCO, ele vai conseguir entrar mais rápido na onda do carro elétrico. Né? Sem falar ali do valor residual, que também foi mencionado, né, que o que a gente está aprendendo, né, como é algo novo. E acho que o carro autônomo, penso que vem um pouquinho mais adiante, porque acho que é algo que funciona bem em ambientes controlados, né, como fábricas, campos de universidades, etc., porque você tem, por um lado, a estrutura, também ouvimos falar ali, né, e se pensar no Brasil, a gente tem uma estrutura, uma infraestrutura muito em construção ainda, quando a gente pensa, né, relacionada a países desenvolvidos, e tem uma questão importante também de legislação, né, você colocar isso aberto no país todo é algo bastante complexo, em ambientes controlados é mais fácil. Por legislação, eu penso assim, você teve um acidente, quem é o culpado? É o dono daquele veículo? É o fabricante do veículo? É o programador que montou o algoritmo do carro autônomo? Então, são várias questões, eu imagino que, assim, compartilhamento, carro elétrico e carro autônomo é a sequência que a gente deve ver chegando aí, não só no Brasil, mas, de certa forma, no mundo todo.
Você vê algum caminho diferente disso, Carlos, né, de que frotas possam passar sem ter, não estou falando de forma geral, né, claro que cada caso é um caso, mas possam, daí nos próximos 5 anos, por exemplo, não ter passado por algum tipo de pool de compartilhamento, um tipo de carro elétrico ou híbrido e aí com olhos para veículos autônomos dali para frente?
Eu concordo com o Diego. Os carros autônomos estão ainda mais no horizonte, mais longe da América Latina. Acho que vamos ter mais híbridos, também mais veículos elétricos, vai ser um pouco mais perto. Por exemplo, se você vai pensar na Europa, na América do Norte, as maiores montadoras têm objetivos globais para avanço da tecnologia elétrica. Então, eles têm que interromper a tecnologia de combustão interna nos próximos 3, 4 anos. E isso vai levar a muitas coisas, como, por exemplo, a parte das empresas privadas a desenvolver mais estações de recarga. Isso vai ser como a parte elétrica que vai avançar pouco a pouco. E a outra parte que falava Sérgio, a parte de compartilhamento. Então, eu acho que vamos ter mais tecnologias, por exemplo, eu falava B2C, parte de compartilhamento de veículos sem chave, você sabe, como telefones ou para abrir as portas, coisas assim vão ser os próximos passos.
E tem uma pressão também, que foi mencionada aí, que é a pressão do impacto ambiental para essas coisas acontecerem também, né? Tanto de investidores de fora do Brasil, ou investidores de qualquer lugar do mundo que começam a fazer pressão por colocar dinheiro em empresas que tenham retornos sustentáveis, né? E do ponto de vista do usuário também, que o perfil tem mudado um pouquinho em algumas faixas, de também querer trabalhar, né, o usuário da frota, eu digo o cliente interno ali, de querer trabalhar em empresas que tenham soluções diferentes também, né, Sérgio?
Isso, eu acho que é um movimento natural, né, de evolução do mundo, as pessoas querem consumir esse tipo de coisa e por conta disso elas também querem produzir esse tipo de coisa. E o gestor de frotas, ele está dentro desse movimento também, né, então ele tem que estar antenado aí pelo com o que está acontecendo, para poder acompanhar a tecnologia e ver aquilo que se adequa à sua frota para ele conseguir fazer mais com menos e conseguir ter uma relevância dentro da empresa e permitir que a empresa consiga cumprir seu propósito ali da melhor forma possível no que tange a frota, que é o que está ali na competência dele.
Uhum, uhum, uhum. Uma boa pergunta. Eu acho que voltaremos acho que pode ser em julho de 2021, pode ser um pouco antes, a trabalhar mais nos escritórios, ou vai ser, mas vamos ter mais uma mistura, vamos ter alguma flexibilidade na parte de trabalhar alguns dias da semana na casa, outros dias no escritório, e se você vai pensar nisso, isso vai ajudar muito na qualidade de vida, evitar o trânsito, ter um pouco mais de tempo com a sua família. Então, da parte dos grandes de frota, eles vão ter que mais pensar, por exemplo, em criar rotas de trabalho que começam na casa do funcionário e não do escritório. Então, eu acho que vai ser uma mistura dessas partes, um pouco de home office e outra parte também de ter esse escritório que tem uma importância para ter um time de trabalho em um só lugar.
O que você acha,
Pedro,
Sérgio? Você acha que esse modelo chega para ficar?
Eu acho que o que vai acontecer é que quando a gente tiver aí uma retomada, né, quando a gente tiver um retorno aí desse isolamento, nós vamos acabar entendendo as diferenças entre esses dois mundos que a gente viveu. É nessa hora que a gente vai perceber bem a diferença. E nós vamos acabar unindo o melhor desses dois mundos, né? Alguns exemplos o Carlos mencionou aí, concordo totalmente. Eu acredito que as empresas elas vão passar a ser um centro de cultura, né? Então, os funcionários vão poder trabalhar na empresa, vão poder trabalhar em casa, mas eles vão para a empresa para absorver a cultura da empresa, né? Para beber daquela cultura e poder pertencer àquele negócio. Eu acredito que as empresas vão aumentar o nível de home office, né, em relação ao que era antes, mas isso não vai ser o que é hoje, que é o 100%. Né? Acho que o ponto mais importante é que as empresas vão dar escolha para os seus funcionários. Né? Essa situação do Covid nos permitiu experienciar isso e tirou aí várias barreiras que antes a gente enxergava, e agora eu acho que isso foi acelerado. Né? Então, as empresas vão dar escolhas, e elas vão acabar se tornando um tipo de coworking, né, em termos de ambiente físico. As pessoas vão reservar seu espaço para trabalhar, vão trabalhar e vão embora. O espaço físico ele vai ser, de certa forma, ampliado. Né? Você vai conseguir uma empresa que tem um espaço, vamos dizer, de X metros quadrados, e ela abriga Y funcionários, ela vai abrigar talvez 3Y funcionários. Né? Então, acho que essas são mudanças que vão acontecer. E o gestor de frotas vai ser impactado por essa mudança. Né? A primeira, você já pode ver aí que é o próprio tamanho da frota, né? Que pode, por conta disso, diminuir. Né? Também tem um impacto aí na mobilidade. Né? Então, primeira coisa, será que precisa mesmo aquele funcionário ir até onde ele está indo? Ele não consegue fazer um trabalho virtual? Outra coisa, para caronas, por exemplo, vindo para a empresa, como o Carlos mencionou, então você tem que estabelecer uma rota e talvez até combinar os dias certos para que aquelas pessoas que vão de carona consigam manter essa carona e manter esse tipo de compartilhamento. Então, acho que, num resumo da ópera aí, o melhor dos dois mundos é o que vem por aí.
Eu acredito que o trabalho vai ser uma das áreas que mais tem sido afetada por essa onda de mobilidade que tem sido propiciada principalmente pela tecnologia e uma das que foi mais impactadas durante a pandemia. Então, a gente juntou aí meio que uma tempestade aí para que esse processo seja acelerado. Né? Uma coisa
Exato.
que foi mencionada durante a apresentação foi o caso do Uber, né, que sempre teve o transporte de passageiros como principal negócio, mas já tinha lançado ali um spin-off que é o Uber Eats, e durante a pandemia o Uber Eats começou a trazer mais receita para dentro do que o transporte de passageiros, né, que era a principal receita e é a grande fonte de sucesso do Uber inicialmente. Ou seja, uma frota que aproveitou a mesma plataforma para pivotar um pouquinho, assim. Só que essa inovação já tinha começado antes. Como é que os gestores de frota podem aproveitar suas plataformas e ter um pouco mais de flexibilidade aí para lidar com cenários, né? Esse é um cenário caótico, um pouco mais caótico do que o comum, mas a verdade é que o ambiente muda o tempo todo, né? Como é que os gestores podem usar suas frotas aí como plataforma para outros negócios, para outros serviços? Pode ser você, Carlos, por favor.
Obrigado. Eu lembro, falando em NAFA, né? Falava em NAFA da parte dos serviços de entrega em domicílio e comércio eletrônico. Todas essas partes de que as empresas se vão acostumar mais a trabalhar online e a receber em casa mais produtos que antes só costumavam comprar na loja. Então, essa parte dessa diferença em tendência de produtos e estar mais ficando na casa trabalhando e ter um Uber, mas pode ser também uma coisa como a Amazon, diferentes projetos, indústrias, tudo com produtos à sua casa, isso vai ser diferente. Essa parte, sim, toda a parte que tem de tecnologia e de produtos à sua casa vai crescer muito, muito, muito. Então, se os gestores de frota estão pensando nisso, hoje pode ser uma loja local que agora vai ter um produto que vai poder brindar almoços a todos os funcionários cada dia em suas casas, coisas assim. Acho que vai ser um mundo um pouco mais diferente, mas toda a parte da tecnologia vai ajudar a ter essa parte mais como comércio eletrônico e essa parte de entregar em domicílio.
Você concorda, Sérgio?
Ô, Pedro, eu concordo, e assim, eu acho que as palavras-chave aqui são versatilidade e adaptação, né? Então, assim, foi mencionado ali, né, o caso do Uber Eats com a receita maior do que do Uber Rides, né? Foi mencionado também as concessionárias que começaram a vender online, né, que há um consenso, e é interessante a gente ver isso acontecendo, né, em alguma parte do mundo. Porque ninguém quer ir no outro local, mas comprar online a pessoa quer, e também ela não está querendo andar em transporte público, se ela pode, ela está fazendo isso, porque ela quer se locomover. Então, acho que o negócio aí é o pensar grande, né, é o saber caminhar, né, então é aquele cabeça nas nuvens e o pé no chão. Acho que o gestor de frotas tem que pensar assim. E assim, esse caminho, ele pode ser uma virada dessas, né, de Uber Eats de Uber Rides virando Uber Eats, mas para o gestor de frotas tem muitas coisas, tem pequenos passos que podem ser acelerados e estão sendo nesse momento. Se você pegar, por exemplo, no Brasil, a frota corporativa, a frota corporativa terceirizada é menos de 10% da frota. Em países desenvolvidos, você tem aí um índice de 50% da frota ser terceirizada, né, de uma maneira geral. E quando a gente pensa em frota própria parada, isso é ativo parado. Isso está na mão do gestor de frotas. Né? E num momento de Covid, ter ativo parado, nesse momento em que a economia está desacelerando, você quer ter o ativo disponível. Então, a terceirização é um movimento natural e que o gestor que está antenado, né, que está pensando grande, ele já vai fazer isso de uma forma mais rápida, né? E uma outra coisa, a gente vê gestores que se beneficiaram de uso de telemetria, por exemplo. Quem já tinha isso antes acabou se beneficiando, né? Porque ele consegue entender entrada e saída nas unidades da empresa, né? Consegue fazer o controle de horário de uso dos veículos, né? Tem empresas que colocaram restrição para isso. Por exemplo, pegar alertas de velocidade. Teve um caso nos Estados Unidos aí que, como está tendo menos carros, os carros estão correndo mais. Então, a telemetria te mostra, esse cara está correndo bastante, né? Tem um motorista aqui que está entrando numa zona perigosa. Então, não é à toa aí que as pesquisas estão apontando aí um aumento da adoção, né, da telemetria, né? A Fleet Latam, por exemplo, fez uma pesquisa grande aí com gestores de frotas na América Latina toda, e a gente teve lá mais de 30% falando, daqui para frente eu não tinha telemetria e vou colocar. Então, acho que assim, tem muitos passos, né? Tem que pensar grande, tem que conseguir fazer uma consideração de planejamento, né, bastante grande, mas tem que saber caminhar nos pequenos passos, que é eles que vão te levar até aquele destino final, né? Então, assim, a ideia é o gestor de frotas ir cada vez mais por estratégico, né? A telemetria, por exemplo, acabou ali deixando as pessoas que já tinham feito isso antes, né, os gestores que tinham feito isso antes, eles se tornaram ali uma fonte de informação importante para a empresa, uma fonte de referência, né? Que é algo muito desejável e que valoriza muito essa profissão que é louvável.
Até como uma forma de medir os impactos, né? A mudança na operação como um todo, né? A gente teve uma palestra antes dessa que a gente transmitiu, em que eles mostravam a taxa de utilização da frota o ano passado, ou seja, um cenário bem estável, mudava nos finais de semana ali, e aí 2020, um cenário estável, só que com uma linha reta de uma utilização muito baixa nos primeiros meses. Então, para você também ter esse histórico de dados e conseguir projetar esse futuro todo, né?
Certamente. A gente percebeu aqui, por exemplo, que durante os dias de semana a gente teve uma redução bastante grande do uso de veículos da frota em termos de porcentagem relacionado ao fim de semana. No fim de semana, um pouco de aumento. Então, um movimento interessante, que é o quê? As pessoas em home office, né, e mais no fim de semana saindo para fazer compra, no supermercado, alguma coisa assim. Então, achei uma coisa interessante, né, que é uma sequência de dados que começa a te trazer insights do que vem por aí. Quem está munido de dados consegue tomar as melhores decisões. Né?
Com certeza. Gente, muito obrigado pela participação de vocês. Tá? Agradeço aí o tempo, as palavras de sabedoria aí, e um pouco de insight nesse mundo de mobilidade que é tão parte da frota, em alguns momentos se parece tão longe, né? Mas que com certeza é um cenário que a gente precisa sempre estar ali navegando, sempre estar olhando para tentar antecipar essas tendências todas. Muito obrigado mesmo, viu?
Pô, Pedro, nós que agradecemos aí, obrigado pela presença, por poder tecer nossos comentários aqui, obrigado pelo convite, e acho muito bacana esse movimento de podermos ver, né, aquilo que está acontecendo na NAFA, que é a maior convenção de gestores de frotas do mundo, e a gente poder estar trazendo isso, né, trazendo aí nossas opiniões. Obrigado muito pelo convite para estar por aqui.
Obrigado, Pedro, e as suas palavras. Muito interessante poder falar com vocês. Um abraço grande.
Um abraço, gente. E com essa super entrevista aí, a gente vai terminando o nosso terceiro dia. Eu vou dar uma resumida em alguns pontos que a gente viu aí na palestra sobre mobilidade, só para vocês verem como esse cenário, né, às vezes ele tem um sentido para um lado, às vezes ele tem um sentido para o outro, e o que eu acho que faz sentido dessa conversa toda aqui é você pensar no que faz, no que tem motivo para você adotar, né, no seu caso, no seu cenário aí na sua frota. Por exemplo, mencionaram lá no comecinho que a Tesla, que é uma montadora de carros elétricos, está valendo 30% do índice de montadoras na Bolsa dos Estados Unidos. Né? Ela sozinha é 1/3 da Bolsa dos Estados Unidos e produz menos veículos que as outras montadoras. Por quê? Porque o mercado está vendo um retorno muito interessante nisso e está apostando, de certa forma, na eletrificação dos veículos. Por outro lado, como o Sérgio mencionou, também a polícia de Los Angeles tentou adotar carro elétrico, mas não era o caso para eles. Não era o cenário ideal para adotar aqueles carros elétricos e eles acabaram devolvendo. Né? A gente também teve um cenário de que eu acho que é um dos casos mais bonitos dessa história, assim, que tem a ver com frota durante a pandemia, que é uma parceria entre a Navia, que foi um parceiro que a gente até já visitou numa das visitas à NAFA, que é uma van autônoma, coletando exames e entregando material para laboratórios de forma autônoma durante a pandemia, ou seja, sem contato de ninguém. Eu acho que tem muitos cenários aí em que a gente pode adotar, por exemplo, drones. Tem muito laboratório fazendo isso já com bastante sucesso para acelerar a entrega, para melhorar a confiabilidade, para de repente conseguir transportar uma coisa num prazo diferente. A gente tem visto o setor de entregas mudar completamente durante esse cenário todo. A gente viu também que transporte público, que sempre foi uma das pontes mais importantes da mobilidade, né? Transporte público, quando a gente começa a falar de multimodais, em algum momento a gente vai precisar de um transporte público bacana. E isso foi sempre muito defendido pelos gestores de mobilidade. E durante esse tempo de pandemia, o que aconteceu? Os orçamentos de transporte público caíram, tendem a cair mais, a gente vai ter um pouco menos de investimento no mundo todo, isso provavelmente, porque não é a hora de aglomerar pessoas no transporte público. Né? Então a gente vai ter que lidar com esses reflexos também aí para frente. Teve o caso do Uber e do Uber Eats, que eu acho que é um bom exemplo de como aproveitar essa mesma plataforma. E um ponto que eu acho que é muito importante, gente, é essa tendência que já tem vindo de alguns anos de as empresas colocarem dinheiro em iniciativas cada vez mais sustentáveis. Essa pressão vai vir de investidores da sua companhia ou de investidores das companhias que você atende, para que em um determinado momento você tenha respostas, tenha alternativas mais sustentáveis à frota. Isso é adotar combustível mais limpo, tentar eletrificar um pedaço da frota, compartilhar mais veículo, né, essa responsabilidade social e ambiental vai aparecer no cenário de vocês, já deve estar batendo no retrovisor aí. E é muito, muito importante que você se prepare para lidar com isso, né? Ainda a gente tem um cenário no Brasil que, por exemplo, carros elétricos são caríssimos, mas vale a pena você ir avaliando, fazendo o seu TCO e tentar encontrar aí qual que é o momento correto para adotar novas soluções. Foi um prazer estar com vocês aqui hoje, gente, né? Eu acho que foi um dia, talvez, esse foi o dia mais comprido, a gente falou no comecinho do dia aí sobre gestão de frotas durante a pandemia, foi uma discussão muito bacana. Depois a gente teve uma palestra sobre análise do ciclo de vida dos bens, né, dos veículos, e qual a hora certa de trocar, se vale a pena escolher um cenário ou outro. Uma palestra bem técnica que eu espero que tenha ajudado vocês aí a projetar um pouco dos cenários que vocês têm. E agora a gente fecha com uma palestra de mobilidade, né? A gente teve uma palestra bem presente e agora a gente tem uma palestra com um olharzinho para o futuro aí. E com certeza, gente, esse é um papel dos gestores de frota, a gente que vai criar esse futuro que a gente está querendo ver, né? As empresas têm um papel muito ativo nisso e a gente tem fomentado isso no Pará e tem visto casos bacanas acontecerem, como por exemplo os casos que a gente registra no 100 Best Fleets e no Flex Awards. Eu já falei para vocês aqui hoje, quem puder inscreva o seu caso, pode ser um caso de mobilidade inclusive, de pool de veículos, de compartilhamento, né? Traga o seu caso para a gente, inscreva a sua frota no 100 Best Fleets e inscreva-se no Flex Awards como um gestor de frota para ser premiado, tá? A gente vai avaliar os melhores casos na Conferência Global, na 6ª Conferência Global Parar, que vai acontecer 21, 22 e 23 de outubro, tá? Daqui a um mês mais ou menos. E também as inscrições já estão abertas, custa R$20, é um preço simbólico que vai ser todo doado para uma instituição. E é mais uma oportunidade da gente continuar essa caminhada que a gente está começando nessa semana, tá certo? Amanhã a gente começa mais cedo também, gente, 11h30 a gente está aqui. Vamos conversar um pouco sobre o mercado automobilístico aqui, as montadoras no Brasil, com o Milad Neto da Jato, que é um cara que está super por dentro do mercado aí, que sempre tem informações muito legais do cenário das montadoras, das concessionárias, dos lançamentos que podem vir no futuro e como isso foi impactado ou não pela pandemia. Daí a gente vai para um painel lá nos Estados Unidos com um tema muito parecido para ver como é que está o mercado lá para eles. Às 2h40 a gente tem mais uma apresentação que é qual o tamanho ideal da minha frota, casos de sucesso de right sizing. E a gente vai falar com o Luiz Dairic e a Janaína Faria da Ouro Verde, um pouco sobre isso. Tem uns casos muito bacanas para trazer para vocês aí de frotas, de dimensionamento de frotas, né, correto, e de tipos de veículos corretos para determinadas áreas da frota. E aí, no finalzinho da tarde, ali por volta das 4h, a gente vai fazer o nosso encerramento desse que foi a primeira cobertura, dessa que está sendo a primeira cobertura virtual da NAFA, né, com uma entrevista com o CEO da NAFA, o Bill Schenkel, falando um pouquinho sobre as percepções dele sobre esses assuntos todos que a gente comentou, sobre como foi ter o evento lá virtual também pela primeira vez, tá certo? O cronograma de amanhã a gente vai colocar aí na página para vocês já. Daqui a pouquinho também, no final do dia, vocês vão receber um e-mail com um resumão de todos esses conteúdos. Fiquem à vontade para usar isso para pesquisas de vocês, para direcionar isso para colegas de trabalho, tá certo? E a gente se vê amanhã, então, às 11h30. Um abração!